It will not make it to the next day if you hoard more than you need, and it means that somebody else does not have as much as they need. And like that's like a physical thing. It's rotting, but it's symbolic of the moral rot of taking more than you need when someone else does not have enough. So there's that Exodus story. Then later on in the Hebrew scriptures, there's this other big story called the exile. If you've been around, you've probably heard me talk about the exile. The exile is this big story where the people of Israel and Judah are forcibly removed from their land and brought into foreign countries, foreign kingdoms. And while they're there, they do the exact same thing as the early Israelites were doing in the desert. They start grumbling and complaining and are asking the question, why do bad things happen to good people? And God once again responds and says, you're not as good as you think you are. Maybe bad things happen because you're not all that great. Maybe this is the consequence of some of the things that you have done, not me forcing them upon you. And in fact, what I need you to think about is that you are worse than the people of Sodom. Familiar at all with the people of Sodom and that story? Many years later, it's been a couple thousand years, that name, if you're familiar with it, often gets tied to a certain type of act. If you're not following me, that's okay. But if you are, many people have taken the original story of Sodom that God is referring to here and said their biggest issue was a sexual sin, and so the act that involves the word Sodom gets aligned with that. But God, through this public truth teller, Ezekiel, says that was not the issue with Sodom. This was the issue with Sodom. This is in Ezekiel 16. This was the great guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excessive food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty, did abominable things before me, and therefore I removed them when I saw it. Again, the issue is you had abundance, and yet you hoarded it for yourselves when there were plenty of people who... Fast forward another 600 years, and we get to this young Jewish rabbi named Jesus, and he's going around doing all these amazing things, miraculous things, teaching and preaching and healing people. And there is only one of his miracles that appears in all of the 4 biographies that we have about his life. There's the resurrection, where he comes back to life. There's only one other miracle that appears in all 4 of those biographies. You know what it is? Feeding of the 5,000, or the loaves and fishes, appears in the other 4. None of the other stories about Jesus appear in every single one of them. This one does, almost as if it's pretty important. So if you're unfamiliar with that story, this is how it goes. On their return, the apostles told Jesus all they had done. He took them with him and withdrew privately to a city called Bethsaida. When the crowds found out about it, they followed him. And he welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed to be cured. The day was drawing to a close, and the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so that they may go into the surrounding villages and countryside to lodge and get provisions, for we are here in a deserted place." But he, Jesus, said to them, "You give them something to eat." They said, "We have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we are to go and buy food for all these people." For there were about 5,000 men. And he said to his disciples, "Make them sit down in groups of about 50 each." They did so and made them all sit down, and taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke them and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd, and all ate and were filled. What was left over was gathered up, 12 baskets of broken pieces. Jesus cared enough to meet those people's need in their moment of need, again, from an abundance perspective. You only have this much? Actually, that is more than enough, so much so that we're going to have 12 basketfuls of stuff left over. Then finally, Jesus hands his mission over to his followers for them to spread this good news and spread this this way of living in the world across the Roman Empire. And as that message spreads, new churches get established, and many of the social hierarchies within the empire actually float down into the churches as well. And there's many of the separations and the priorities of different types of people happen within the churches too. And that includes around food. It includes all the way down to this meal that Jesus established called the Lord's Supper or communion. It's starting to impact even the way that they do that among themselves. And so this guy named Paul, who was one who started many of these churches, who wrote much of the Christian scriptures that we now have, comes around and says, this is insane what you are doing. You are not working from an abundance perspective where all are equal and all deserve to have enough. And so this is what he says in his letter to this church in the city of Corinth. Now in the following instructions, I do not commend you, because when you come together is not for better, but for the worse. For, to begin with, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you. And to some extent, I believe it. Indeed, there have been factions among you, for only so will it become clear who among you are genuine. When you come together, it is not really to eat the Lord's Supper, for when you come to eat, each of you goes ahead with your own supper, and one goes hungry and another becomes drunk. What? Do you not have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you show contempt for the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What should I say to you? Should I commend you? In this matter, I do not commend you. Whoever therefore eats the bread and drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be answerable for the body and the blood of the Lord. Examine yourselves, for only then eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For all who eat and drink without discerning the body eat and drink judgment against themselves. 4 different stories across like the whole of the Jewish and Christian